Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. I'm Debashis Basu. On June 6th, the Reserve Bank of India surprised the market, slicing the repo rate by 50 basis points to 5.5%. It also cut the cash reserve ratio by 100 basis points. The move is expected to inject about 2.5 lakh crores into the system, and that briefly lifted the spirits in the stock market. The Nifty index climbed 1% that day with a modest gain the day after. But by the end of the week, the index was down. The rate cut is actually a sideshow. With the RBI shifting its stance from neutral to just accommodative, there will be no easing cycle, as the market calls it. An easing cycle means successive cuts of interest rate lower and lower, which boosts demand and which boosts growth. A 100 basis point cut will do little to spur demand. The immediate reason, of course, is the overall growth expectations are very modest. The RBI's own projection of GDP growth is 6.5%, the same as last year. And consumer prices are supposed to be down slightly. But the real reason why the rate cuts have nothing to do with GDP growth is that the four main economic drivers of the economy are all stuck in a low gear. Consider consumption first. Private final consumption expenditure, as the economists love to call it, make up nearly 60% of India's GDP. And that fell from a growth rate of 6.8% in the years before COVID to 4.1% in FY20. After a brief post-pandemic recovery, it fell back again to 5.6% in FY24, according to the RBI, and an even weaker 4.4% according to the National Statistics Office. The consumption rebound was short-lived because it was led by debt and higher welfare spending by the government. After all, average income growth, or rather salary growth in most sectors, which is engineering, financial services, retail, information technology, logistics, and consumer goods, was outpaced by inflation. People are not able to save, much less consume. But debt-funded consumption has its limits. Since mid-2023, credit growth of personal loans has fallen off the cliff from 22% down to 10% or so now, reducing consumption even further. The second element in GDP growth is net exports, that is, total exports minus imports. Indian exports are a disaster. Large headline stories like growing cell phone exports by Apple and Samsung mask a poor overall export performance. Merchandise exports fell 12.8% in 23-24 and grew only about 20% in 24-25. Net exports, which is, as I said, exports minus imports, is a component of GDP growth, and year after year, India's exports are negative. India has no control over imports, which is fossil fuel and gold imports. They are inelastic, and India benefits only when prices of these commodities come down, not for any efficiency reasons within the country. India cannot boost exports either because of enormous cost of doing business, saps the productivity and competitiveness of Indian exporters. Indian services exports and enormous remittances partly reduce the impact of poor net exports. The third driver of GDP growth is private capital expenditure, or capex. There are lots of bullish anecdotal evidence about shining new factories coming up, but most comprehensive and authentic set of data is not rosy. According to the forward-looking survey of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, actual intended private capex will fall from 6.6 lakh crore in FY25 to 4.9 lakh crore in FY26, down 26%. The survey was confined to large enterprises. Among the small and medium enterprises, the mood is worse. The reason for sluggish spending is sluggish demand, which can be traced back to the Indian state, which comes in the way of creating a thriving, competitive, and innovative business climate. This leads us to the fourth engine of growth, which is government capex, unfortunately the most important one currently. India is continuing with the old model of dominant state, in which the state extorts a lot of money from businesses and citizens in ever-increasing variance, even in a period of sluggish growth. Notice that manufacturing and exports growth are miserably low, and even large companies are struggling to increase their revenues beyond single digits, but the government's take from goods and services tax between FY20 and FY25 expanded by an astonishing 19.46% compounded annual rate. In FY23 and 24, capitalizing on GST collections and adding huge borrowings to the pot, the government massively increased its spending. The budget of 23-24 announced a capital outlay of 10 lakh crore, which is an unprecedented number, which was increased to 11 lakh crore next year to be spent on railways, roads, urban transport, waterworks, energy transformation, and defense production. All that government capex boosted growth for 2 years, but despite large allocations, and actual government capex last year was surprisingly sluggish. There was no growth in FY25, while revenue expenditure went up, leading to a 22% revenue deficit. In a society where rule of law is weak, corruption is rampant, and red tape is entrenched, limitations to government capex as a driver of growth is obvious. Also, if tax and spend was expected to trickle down, it has failed. India's rural wages and job growth are stagnant, which has wrecked consumption growth. So everything is actually connected, and we are paying the price of not being able to fix things at the base. Clearly, it is not for the RBI and its Monetary Policy Committee to fix any of these deep structural issues and magically create growth from nowhere. If any evidence was needed that the current economic strategy is not working, payroll growth is a definitive one. According to government data, net payroll additions under Employee Provident Fund was minus 5.1% in FY24 and minus 1.3% under FY25. Naukri Job Seek Index, or white-collar jobs, has flattened since FY23. Weak job creation reflects how ineffective the headline 6.5 GDP growth really is. It also hobbles consumption, the economy's lifeblood. We need to face facts. What we have is a structural, not a cyclical issue. If the economy is seen to be doing well, it is mainly for the well-off and the privileged people, mostly in the urban centers. We are running far below our true potential and what is actually needed to lift millions of people rapidly from poverty, something that China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and other countries have done. If you like this, please do share, and thanks for watching.